This comes from a film that ESRO, the European Space Research Organization, produced about its installation and use of Dialog, which is called Recon, but the two are synonymous for your information.
So I'll start the video.
Please.
Every day sees the publication of a mass of documents and reports in science and technology, which no modern company can ignore if it wants to keep its place or consolidate its position in a competitive environment. However, the problems are not solved by drowning the engineers and scientists under an avalanche of documents.
There's more of this coming later. Now, Mel Day was head of documentation at NASA in Washington, D.C., and they had a retrieval system at the time, which was all that was done, which we call a batch retrieval system, a 1410, and the way searches were done, he will explain to you. So can we have the next film, please?
One of the problems we had with a batch type system is that it was slow, and it was impossible for the person with the question to interact with the database. He would write his question down, he would send it down to the computer room, they would batch the questions. If he had a halfway decent priority, he might get the answer back in a day or a week or 2 weeks. And then when he got the answer back, he would usually have to modify his question, and this was very, very time-consuming.
You can see that batch searching was very tedious, although it probably beat going through the published indexes of the day. But it also gave us the incentive and, in a sense, the requirements for producing an interactive online system. If we can go to the next slide, please.
We're there.
At the bottom, you'll see that we had a team of 6 that were programming the first Dialog software. I don't think anyone probably knows Ed Estes was the system architect, and he designed the files and made this whole thing work that I'll talk about a little bit later. But then Bob Mitchell, Ken Liu was our programmer. He was VAL programming, of course, and 32K, what can you do? And he stayed with Dialog all the way through, longer than I, in fact, and in programming. Dexter Schultz and Jim Brick stayed with Dialog for about 5 years, and then they left and went elsewhere. But I put together some design specifications and gave them to Ed Estes, and those design specifications included providing a display of the index of the words in the database so that the customer could see what words were possible to use for searching. And then I look at searching as a process, not a probe. Batch searching is a probe. A lot of the current search engines are probes, but I always felt that as opposed to having a hammer and doing one swipe, it was nice if you could take several smaller swipes with that hammer. In other words, if you could divide the database into subsets corresponding to the different elements that you were searching, and then combine and fit those together, and also then get feedback from the database saying, this is what I got, is this what you want? No. And that's how we called the system Dialog. The way that came about, my wife's name is Ginger, and we had 2 little kids back in those days. We were driving up to Portland, Oregon. Ginger was driving, and I had a voice-activated recorder, and I was dictating our program plan for the development of Dialog as we drove up there. And I've lost that, but I remember hearing Jennifer, our daughter, crying in the background as we were driving up. But I was talking with Ginger and saying, you know, what are we going to call this damn thing? Because if it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have an existence. And we went back and forth, and suddenly we said, Dialog, that's the answer. So we called it Dialog. Okay, the commands, well, it's based on an inverted file index, not a linear file or a sequential file. Batch search systems were all sequential linear file systems. In other words, you'd punch your query into punch cards, and you'd have your database on a tape, and you'd pass record by record by record and match the query against the particular item to see if you wanted to print it out. And with us, we developed an inverted index, which is like a back of the book index. It just has the words associated with the document numbers of the documents containing the word and some other information. So then when you do a search, you're really just putting those words together and then doing a Boolean match on the different strings of accession numbers describing the documents. And it went very fast. Okay, well anyway, those are the different files that Ed Estes put together for us, and it enabled the commands that you see at the bottom of the slide. The begin command, because we had multiple files, and you could select the file or multiple files that you wish to select, that you wish to search. Expanded the alphabetical words around a term or brought in the related terms, and select put the terms together in Boolean fashion to do a search, and then type or display, produce the output, and then print allowed you to print it either do a batch print, batch remote print. Some of our customers wanted double copies, 2 copies of their printouts, and so we had a room that had our printer, and we were using these hole punched, or what do they call them, feed printers. And we had one guy that worked all night, and one night he was called away from the printer room to the phone for a couple of minutes to talk to a customer, and lo and behold, he went back into the print room, and it was full of paper because the decalator had failed. That was Jeff Sharp. I don't know if any of you know Jeff Sharp. He's a trombone player. I hired him out of Woody Herman's band on the road. He's also a great programmer. Okay, so anyway, Mel Day went on to say, after talking about his batch search system, his need for an interactive system. Maybe we can play that piece of the video.
We decided that in order that we should have an interactive system, and so that the individual with the question could interact with the database, get an answer back essentially immediately, and then move on from there. And we made a study of the field at that particular point in time. This was in 1960. And we decided that the Dialog team at that time, the Roger Summer team at that particular time, was the best qualified to do the job. And we asked them to produce a system which we called NASA Recon. But there was some relation to Dialog. And it was to be used by NASA at its central facility in Washington, and it would provide online interactive service to all of the NASA centers around the country. And that went active in 1965.
Yeah, Mel's date on 1960 was incorrect. It was actually 1964. But they put out a competitive RFP that we bid on, along with about 12 other software producers at the time, and we won the RFP, and that's what allowed us to go on and develop Recon based upon Dialog that we'd previously developed. In the contract, we wrote, oh God, what was that called? Terms of use or something, that gave us the right to use the software that we produced, commercial or however we chose. And it also gave the government the right to distribute amongst other government agencies. So what happened there was that Mel Day just passed that software out in a wholesale fashion, to several other organizations. I was a little upset at that, but he said, look, Roger, he said, there's an opportunity there. They don't know how to install the software, and they don't know how to maintain it. So we saw ourselves in a software development, installation, and maintenance business, you know, contract at a time. And we had such contracts with AEC, with ESRO, the European Space Research Organization, Department of Justice, and then finally with the U.S. Department of Education. Can we show the ESRO film?
Sure. And I think that date that he said that it was actually operational 65 was actually 67. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
64, we bid the bid, or we put in the bid, as I recall, and it went operational 67.
The European space organizations offer them an automatic documentation system, the RECON.
We got the documents from the Space Documentation Service.
Thank you. Ah, the Industrial Topics from the Space Documentation Service.
That's right.
Industrial Topics, a monthly updating service, covers 100 selected subjects. It is disseminated to subscribers.
This reminds me, there's a literature search I would like to have them do on osmosis filtration. Could you see to that, please?
Yes, of course.
This research worker we've just seen has gained access to a vast reference system stored in a computer. No need to go to the library. Dial a phone number and you're able to browse through the files on a television screen. Europe's first information retrieval network has just been put into operation and permits direct interrogation of a computer in Darmstadt, Germany. The network consists of 2 terminals at the ESRO headquarters in Paris. 1 terminal at the Documentation Center of the Department for Trade and Industry near London. 1 terminal at the French Space Center, CNES, at Bretigny. 1 terminal at the ESRO Center at Noordwijk, Holland. 1 terminal at Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. 1 terminal in Munich. 1 terminal near Rome. Shortly, the Royal Library in Brussels, as well as the Dutch Aeronautic Laboratories near Amsterdam, will be linked to this network. This network offers plenty of opportunities for extensions. A link-up via a telecommunication satellite of the Paris terminals with a computer file in Los Angeles has been tried and proved already. Thanks to a generous agreement with NASA, the European space organizations process a great number of reports and in exchange have gained access to the large documentation for the RECON system developed by Lockheed. Every month, NASA sends a copy of its tapes to the Space Documentation Service. More than 6,000 references per month. Since 1962, more than 500,000 references of scientific or technical results have been stored at the ESRO Computer Center. These references, generated in the course of space programs, don't only relate to aerospace, but cover the whole spectrum of science and technology. A network is now running across Europe which will have great impact on the progress of science and technology.
Vous avez ça, Ron?
Hallo, Darmstadt?
Pronto Darmstadt. Madrid. Moscati. Passatemi il resto.
Can I have Rika?
Hello Darmstadt.
Hello, here, München.
Hello, Darmstadt. This is Paris. Could you load recon for us, please? Thank you.
Automation allows men to face the information explosion and frees them from the servitudes of over-specialization.
Okay, I guess that's it for that. I mentioned that one of the organizations that Mel Day gave the software to was ERIC, the Office of Education for the ERIC database. It stands for Educational Resource Information Center database. So I met with Lee Birchinall, who was in charge at the time, and said, okay, we'll write up a contract, I'll give you terms and conditions, we'll write up a contract to install this software on your computer. He said, hell, we don't have a computer. And he said, why don't you put it on your computer and we'll just access your computer and pay you to do that. And I thought, nice business, nice business. And that was another profound occurrence in the history of Dialog, because suddenly we changed from a software installation maintenance company with contracts that went up and down, hires and fires, as Lockheed was very used to a services business where people get dependent on the service and you don't have the fluctuation. Anyway, that's where we changed into a services business. We went commercial with the business in 1972 because we had requests from customers to access the databases that we had at the time, that I think were the AEC database, Atomic Energy Commission, now I guess called Energy. And let's see, we had ERIC, of course, and we had one called Pandex that I won't go into, and then we started adding databases. So our business from that time on was kind of a push-pull with technology. I mean, we'd get more customers, response time would slow down, we'd get complaints, we'd add another computer. I mean, we didn't have processor farms in those days, we just added more mainframes, and more storage. And at Lockheed, at the Palo Alto Research Facility, we took over half of the cafeteria for our data cells. And then we started taking over offices for our data cells because we were making money, and that was the word in those days. And I'd walk into somebody's office and they'd say, "Get out of here, Summit." But then we got a new facility then in 1987, I believe, over on 81? Not 87, no. 87 is another important date.
Yes.
Yeah, and 80 or 81. And we were able to move everything over there, and that first slide that you saw was a picture from that facility. So I'll show you the next slide, please. Some of you may recognize this phenomenal device that allowed you to interact with the computer. Okay, and we'll show the next slide, please. And so I've largely covered most of these points, I believe. The outcome was the new facility at 3251 Hanover, and we stayed in the industrial park. The facilities people at Lockheed said, when we were talking about getting new facilities, said, "Oh yeah, we have some great property down in South San Jose, very cheap rent." Well, one of the philosophies I had, I always wanted a facility that people would rather work in than be at home if possible, or at least be equally comfortable working in. So I said, no, we want to stay in the industrial park. They said, well, show us why. Anyway, we were using power from Palo Alto, which of course has much lower power rates than San Jose did at the time. And we were able to do a justification for doing our new facility in the industrial park. So that worked out very well. Okay, now what did we have for databases? I might mention that we have a poster over there that has all of the databases on it that Dialog had in about 1967. Ron Rodriguez brought that in for us, and it's quite amazing even for me to see now. But
There's about 300 on there, I believe.
yeah, and we had more. I mean, we kept adding and adding. We had to contract for databases. We had to pay royalties for the use of those databases. It wasn't like, going out and scanning the internet for our data. Okay, the next slide shows just a smattering of the types of databases and indexes that we had. And then the following slide shows the growth in content offerings that we had. That's probably a little difficult to read, but it certainly is for me here. But you can see an idea, the idea that we grew both in type of content and in overall quantity of databases. And then the next slide shows our revenue and profit growth over a period from 1972 to about 1987, I believe. The blue line is our revenue. The the yellow line, I believe, is percent of revenue to sales, and the bottom red line is the profit itself. And you'll see that the percentage line and the profit line cross about 1987, and that'll be significant actually in Bob's presentation later on. Then the final slide is just kind of a walk-off showing that we grew from 6 to 300 employees, and this is just one of the parties that we had between the two new buildings that we occupied in the industrial park. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Roger.